The reality is that we never recovered from 2008. We had a bank recovery. Now we've got a new bubble in the stock market. Now they're going to blame it on Trump because the market started to go up quite a bit since he's come in. But we've been in the stock market bubble because people with wealth have a lot of money to spend on stocks. So now the other thing is we're one bad derivative trade away from having a domino-style collapse of the banking system.
Welcome back to Rethinking a Dollar. Today I'm excited to have a returning guest, Mr. Harley Schlanger. Harley is a historian as well as national spokesman for the LaRouche PAC, a political action committee founded by Lyndon LaRouche. Mr. Schlanger is a frequent contributor on a variety of media outlets and travels the world sharing his expertise on economics and as well as political reform. So Harley, welcome back to Rethinking a Dollar.
Good to be with you again, Mike.
Well, I appreciate you sitting down with me. It's been a while since we last spoken, and of course, a lot of things have changed in your world. So, if you want, give the audience a chance to catch up with Harley and what you've been up to and things you got going on.
Well, as of the summer, I relocated with my family to Europe. We were in Austria for a while, then we moved to an area outside of Berlin. I'm working in the LaRouche office in Berlin now, and I think the most important thing is that the world is changing dramatically, starting with Brexit, with the Trump election. We're now at a point where people can't assume they know what's going to happen from one day to the next. And there's some good sides to that, but it's also, there's a lot of tension, a lot of nervousness. Here in Germany, you see people completely hysterical when Trump says he's going to change what the U.S. is doing in NATO. To me, that's good because NATO is essentially moving troops to the border with Russia and provoking a response from the Russians. If Trump says he's not going to do that and he's going to talk to the Russians, that's all for the good. But where does that leave the Germans? Right. When the German chancellor has said she's with the United States against Russia. Now, if the United States is out, where does that leave the Germans? So it's a very fascinating moment. As a historian, I love the drama and intrigue. As someone who's got 2 young kids, I sit there and say, boy, we better make this thing work.
Now, so speaking of Trump, I want to get your thoughts on that. Like, you're being in Germany now. What were your thoughts? Did you anticipate, the outcome that we have now with Trump being the 40 or soon to be the 45th president? Were you surprised, or did you kind of think that was the movement that we're currently in now?
I wasn't surprised at all. I watched Trump very carefully decimate the Republican Party during the primaries. Masterfully destroy the Bush machine. I mean, to me, that was something that had to be done. And unfortunately, the Democrats couldn't do it. They left it to this somewhat crazed egomaniac who wouldn't follow his script. He did what he was going to do. But the key, and I saw this as the election unfolded, is that someone around Trump, maybe it was Trump, maybe it was someone else, had their finger on the pulse of the country. That a whole section of the American people, and not just white, angry, old people, but including sections of the Hispanic community, the Asian community, even in the African American community. The number of African Americans who voted was down significantly from 2008 to 2012 because it didn't automatically translate that Hillary Clinton was going to do something good. So I wasn't shocked by Trump's victory. I was a little surprised by how the Midwest went as a whole. But look, he was very clever with his attacks on the free trade agreements, which, as you know from Detroit, these were wrecking balls against the population. Right. And nobody took seriously the fact that people would actually vote for Trump because they didn't hear the anguish and screams. And one person who did hear that was Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton said, look, we got to go talk to these people. We got to offer them something. And Hillary didn't pay attention to her husband, which in the long run may turn out to have been a real problem for her. Yeah. So I wasn't that shocked. Now, what I'm hoping is that all the foolish stuff from the Trump campaign on building walls and kicking out Muslims and things like that was just campaign rhetoric. That he's going to stick to a couple of points that were effective, namely talk with Russia and China instead of threaten, look to really shackle Wall Street. And to do that, you need the Glass-Steagall bill. You need to break up the big banks. And Trump has said he's going to do that. And he's got Wall Street nervous. And then along with that, junk the free trade agreements, and go with a major infrastructure program. If he does those things, he has a chance not just to be a good president, but to unite the people behind him.
Right.
We should have in 2008, like you and I talked about this the last time I was on with you, Obama had an opportunity to go with a Franklin Roosevelt style policy. He didn't do it. And he said the Republicans were too strong against him, but he had a majority in both houses when he came in and support from the American people. He let that drift away. If Trump were to put forward a Roosevelt-style policy, above party, but for the nation, break up the banks, channel funds into the physical economy, the real economy, create jobs, and break up these free trade agreements and instead do bilateral and multilateral discussions, work with the Chinese and the Russians, that's a revolution in the making.
All right. Now, you hinted at Bill Clinton, and of course, during all the debates, he just basically hounded on the fact that NAFTA was the worst legislation that could ever been written. He kind of emphasized that. He emphasized that point to the extreme. Now, do you think if he actually goes about doing that within his first 100 days of trying to renegotiate some things, that it'll be something that'll be felt in 2017, or is this something that we can look forward to 5-10 years from now? Will it make a difference right away in his first, stint as president?
And that's why he's got to do something right away that will have a measurable effect. That's what the genius of Franklin Roosevelt was, that he passed Glass-Steagall within less than a month of coming in office. So he showed the American people the bankers were not going to be able to speculate and swindle any longer. Now, then he came up with the infrastructure projects, the Tennessee Valley Authority, Hoover Dam, and Cooley Dam, and so on. Some of these had already been on the books, but they hadn't been funded. So people started getting jobs. There was a renewed hope. And before he did Glass-Steagall, he shut down the banks and then had a fireside chat. And he said, look, we're going to straighten out these banks. Trump has an opportunity to do that. I mean, the biggest problem that we have in this country is that we've had low interest rates for the last 8 years. And all that money from the Federal Reserve, from sale of junk bonds, equity funds, hedge funds, foreign funds coming in, all of it's sitting in banks and sitting in the Fed. It's not going into the physical economy. So if you want to open up a mom and pop shop or a small business, you can't get funded. But if you're a big bank and you're sitting there with trillions of dollars of worthless derivatives on your books, and you need cash to back it up, you line up and the Fed will give it to you. Right. So if Trump were to say, we're going to channel credit to real production and create jobs and give people hope again, take some of the unskilled or semi-skilled people coming out of high school and college today and say to them, we've got a job for you if you want to work. One of the biggest problems we have is that the younger generation doesn't have marketable skills. They've not been trained, and they don't have much hope. They have no vision of what the country used to be when it worked.
Right.
People, your parents' age, you had a sense of a productive economy. We don't have that anymore.
Right.
And so you see suicide rates up, drug usage, alcohol usage, not just in poor African-American communities, but everywhere. That could be reversed if you have a president who inspires people and builds things. Will Trump do it? I don't know. But I think we have to put the pressure on the Congress for him to do that. And one thing he could do that could work right away is call up Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, two of the co-sponsors of the modern 21st century Glass-Steagall bill that's before the Senate, and say, I want to work with you to get this passed before the inauguration. Something like that would just, it would be like a grenade in the punch bowl. It would really cause some interesting reverberations.
Yeah. Now, with the idea of Trump's presidency is going to come down to fiscal policy as far as the expenditures, as you mentioned. Like, his first 100 days, he made some promises about getting things done. Now, how does this, spending that will be suggested play into the fact that we're already 20 trillion-ish or approaching 20 trillion in national debt? How does him adding, I guess I heard something about 1 trillion for his programs? It'll help, but wouldn't that cause problems as well because he's borrowing from something that can't be repaid?
No, this is the beauty of infrastructure, and this is how our country was founded. This was Alexander Hamilton's 4 projects, where he had a public credit system, a national banking system, and infrastructure and manufacturing. The problem is not debt. The problem is what you go into debt to do. It's like if you're unemployed and you have a mortgage and you pay the mortgage on a credit card, that's insane.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of thing we've been doing. That's what we're doing with the Federal Reserve zero interest policy to the banks. But if you borrow for the purposes of investing in something that increases the productivity, then you're actually increasing the future wealth. Then there's no question that you can cover the debt. You don't even have to cover the debt immediately, but it shows that you're actually adding value to the society in real terms as opposed to monetary terms. Our biggest problem is that the debt is part of a monetary approach to economics, and we've turned from a productive society to a consumer society. When you do this, you take away the ability to extinguish the debt. And what Alexander Hamilton said is never take on a debt without the means to extinguish it. But a well-managed public debt is a national blessing. And so I think this is where, for example, if we build high-speed rail, if we build new power plants, new water systems, and for example, for Flint, Michigan, you put money into projects that will improve the lives of people and ultimately increase the productivity because high-speed rail is more productive than trucks. You actually add to the total national economy. So the short-term increase in debt is more than compensated by the long-term increase in productivity. And that's what Trump needs to learn. I don't think he understands that yet. He does understand that there's a difference between actually building something and speculation. But we don't just need luxury hotels. We need a lot of other things.
Now, the mainstream media for the last several years has been really pushing the whole economic recovery. The president goes out and said we're doing fine, and he'll call off 6 or 7 unemployment, whatever. All that's going great, And then even I think I saw somewhere the U.S. Treasury confirmed that under President Obama we've been doing the best in decades, type of thing. Now, a lot of alternative media guys say that we're already in a recession based upon certain data statistics that have came out that have shown a lack of growth. Are we currently in an economic recovery, or where are we at in as far as this recession talk? And if we are heading into one or already in one, how will this play in the whole fiscal growth, things that Trump is going to face coming in his first couple months or so?
Well, the old saying, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. The statistics that the government puts out are fraudulent. Yeah, there are more people working. There are people who work 3 or 4 jobs. But the one thing or the two things you have to look at is the nature of employment, because many of the jobs created since 2008 have been temporary, part-time, and low wage. And the actual wage level of people is lower today in real terms than it was 40 years ago in the United States. Then there's the extremes in wealth. The wealthy people are getting more and more, and the average family having less and less. Now, the reality is that we never recovered from 2008. We had a bank recovery. Now we've got a new bubble in the stock market. Now they're going to blame it on Trump because the market started to go up quite a bit since he's come in. But we've been in the stock market bubble because people with wealth have a lot of money to spend on stocks. So now the other thing is we're one bad derivative trade away from having a domino-style collapse of the banking system. And there was a report out today that Royal Bank of Scotland is following the pattern of Deutsche Bank, which is toward disintegration. Now, if one of those big banks goes, the Italian banking system craters, the French banking system, and Wall Street, Citibank, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo were all reported to be dramatically underfunded by the Financial Stability Board today. So the banking system is weak, even with all the money they've gotten from the Fed. Consumer spending is down, productivity is down. So in real terms, we're in a deep recession. And, it's sort of like the thing where your brother-in-law is still living on your couch, and your couch is about to get repossessed, and then Obama comes on and says, this is a strong economy. Who do you believe?
Right. Now, heading into December, and I've become accustomed to the fact that it's all just talk, but yet the mainstream media loves to focus in on, will they raise rates? Is this the time? There's a 99% chance that it's going to happen now, whatever. And so they continue to just focus on the a quarter point of interest rates. I mean, if they raise rates next month, will it make a difference as far as the overall scheme of things? And why is the media paying so much attention to FOMC meetings and interest rates. I mean, it's been 8 years now, so who cares? For the most part, other than the fact that it was.
Well,
go ahead.
no, you're absolutely right. The question is, why did they postpone raising rates for so long? Because they're afraid if they raise rates that you're going to have a tightening of the economy, and the little bit of growth that's there will be choked off. Now, a quarter of a point increase isn't going to make a difference. The problem you have is that the big banks have plenty of liquidity, but they're insolvent. And this is an important lesson for people. Liquidity is not good if you're not using the liquidity for something. Solvency is good, but what if you're solvent, but you can't borrow money to expand on your existing credit portfolio? So a lot of the small and regional banks are solvent but have no liquidity. And the big banks have tons of liquidity, but they're stockpiling it for the possibility that they're going to need it to bail themselves out, or in the hopes that the Federal Reserve will bail them out again. In Europe, where you have serious banking crisis, Mario Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank, keeps saying he has the big bazooka in reserve, a big flow of liquidity. And someone was asking me to describe what does this mean, and I said it's sort of like a cousin sperm bank. No matter how much liquidity you have, the outcome will be a disaster, a monstrosity. And that's where we are right now. We're just intermingling bad assets at growing rates and then backing it up with free money from central banks. And that's why at the same time you have the talk of should we raise rates, you have the discussion, people like Rogoff, a very well-known economist, saying, no, we need 5% negative interest rates. Whoa. So the interest rate thing is the problem of being captive to monetary theory as opposed to a physical productive idea of economics. And that's what Mr. LaRouche keeps saying is get back to physical production, to scientific creativity, to technological innovation. That's how you build an economy. And if your concern is to keep the bankers happy with their bonuses and everything else, then you're not going to have anything when the day comes that they realize that they're playing with funny money.
Right. So just say, for example, 2017 is a couple weeks away. We enter 2017, and then I'm hearing a lot of people mention that they're going to really let the wheels fall off the car and see what happens. Now, if the idea of a recession is in play and is officially announced, then what would you think would be the ideal playbook of the Fed and fiscal policy and all the policymakers to handle the next crisis? Because as we talked before, there is a day of reckoning coming. What are some things that you think may play out as far as them trying to address it and handle it and try to keep the calm amongst the people?
Well, I like to look at it differently. We need to move preemptively to stop that, because some people, the Austrian school, the Schumpeter type, say, well, you should let it collapse and then start all over. But a collapse of the financial system means tens of millions of people are going to be in danger. They're not going to be able to get health care. They're not going to be able to get gasoline, food, milk, bread. You create tremendous potential chaos and friction in society. The idea that we can do another big bailout, we can't. We've been doing a bailout. The bailout never stopped. It just wasn't federal government funds, it's Federal Reserve funds. So there's no, we can't allow it to play out. We have to take preemptive action. Now, by preemptive action, I don't mean fiscal policy or monetary policy. As far as fiscal policy is concerned, the only thing I would say is spend money on infrastructure. Go ahead and generate real credit. But in terms of the most important thing, I think there are people in the financial sector who would let a collapse occur to try to prevent Trump from having any freedom to act. The same way they tried to do with FDR when the banks collapsed after the November 1932 election up to 33. They tried to constrain FDR's actions. That's why Trump should move preemptively, either to go with Glass-Steagall before the inauguration through the lame duck session, or make that a priority in the first 100 days. If he does that, then he has a banking system which can function for a real recovery. If he doesn't, then it's a throw of the dice as to where things are going to go.
All right. Now, you're currently over there in Germany. I wanted to kind of touch on the European economy, what's going on over there. and heading into 2017, there's a lot of banking issues there, as you mentioned, and the Royal Bank of Scotland, something just brought to my attention for the first time. What's the talk on the ground amongst the German people with the whole Deutsche Bank, being that Germany is the anchor and backbone of Europe? What's the feelings there among the citizens? Are they concerned? Do they care? Or what's the millennial generation talking about, from what you're hearing?
Well, a lot of them are saying, let it go, Deutsche Bank's too big, it should be allowed to collapse, but they don't know the consequences of that. Deutsche Bank is the German economy. It used to be a good bank. And the former head of Deutsche Bank was a man named Herrhausen, who, when the wall came down and communism collapsed, said Germany should lend money and create credit for Eastern Europe and Russia to grow and be a trade partner. He was assassinated, and Deutsche Bank was taken over by speculators who moved the headquarters to London and turned it into the largest bank in Europe for derivatives trading. Now, we need a bank like Deutsche Bank, provided that bank is lending money to the real economy. And so the Germans have a problem, because if you save Deutsche Bank now, after the finance minister Schäuble said, we're not going to save the Greek banks, we're not going to save the Italian banks, no bailouts are allowed, what happens then if Germany turns around and bails out Deutsche Bank? So unless you break the European Union's banking policy, the single resolution mechanism as it's called, unless you break that apart and say, let's start all over, including possibly junking the euro and having various kinds of agreements, but not a monetary financial agreement until countries are brought up to an equal level. Unless you do that, chaos is going to ensue. And so, unless there's a big change in Europe, we're going to see chaos in Europe. Now, the potential for a big change comes from Brexit and Trump, not to follow necessarily what they did, but the fact that you can go ahead and break with the establishment and get support from the people. I find it interesting that people who say they're for democracy, like Hillary Clinton, has no problem saying she's for regime change in Syria when the Syrian people voted repeatedly for Assad. Or when the Ukrainians in Crimea voted for the Russians, and we say, well, that's an illegal takeover. Well, what about the people of Europe who say they don't like the banking resolutions? They don't like the European Union and the European Central Bank. I'll give you an example, Mike. This is really important. With the earthquakes in Italy, the Italian government wants to rebuild these areas. And the European Central Bank said the Italian government is already too far over debt, so they can't spend money on rebuilding. Now, you've got tens of thousands of people with no electricity, no water, no shelter. How can you tell a government they can't spend money on that? But that's what the EU has become. So that's where you see the dissension and the splits occurring. And what Mr. LaRouche is trying to say, or Mrs. LaRouche is saying as the leader of our organization here, is let's take this opportunity of a break against the establishment to put this establishment away, put it out of its misery, make them eat their bad losses, and have government do its function to regulate banking so that we have a banking system that makes credit available for real production. If we do that, I think we'd be in good shape.
Right, and that idea there is sounds great, and if it was doable, I hope and pray that we can get to that point. But do you really believe that the establishment, who is centuries embedded into our entire governing structure, will go down that easy? Do you think that they would just say, hey, okay, there's a movement against us, the people are waking up, so it's just, man, the solutions.
Are they going to walk off the field?
Yeah, they're going to just hang it up and say, hey, we're done.
They're going to use the FBI, blackmail, bribes, everything they have. But here's the advantage we have. They ain't that smart. They've bankrupted the world economy. They could do whatever they wanted, and what they've done is made things worse and worse and worse. What they've counted on is that my generation and your generation settled for social networking and sports and entertainment as an alternative to being engaged in civic responsibility. And so we're not prepared for the crisis. We better prepare ourselves quickly, because they're prepared. They're not going to give up power easily. I mean, they could shoot Trump tomorrow. There are a lot of things that could happen that would be potentially catastrophic.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that because I think Trump is so good. It's just you could unleash chaos. And what would your generation, what would my generation do? Well, that's why I spend most of my time telling people, get rid of your pessimism. You're used to having no effect on the world. You're used to being a commodity. Instead, we're human beings. We're creative. We have needs that we share in common with 7.2 billion people in the world. Can we possibly look for the common interests of mankind and function on that basis, make governments work on that basis? Well, it means we're going to have to crack a few heads to do it.
Right.
And I'm not just talking about the establishment, I'm talking about young people have to get engaged in the process.
All right. Now, as we draw towards the close, a couple more questions. I wanted to get your thoughts on the SDR situation, which the yuan being included, and being that it seems like the establishment or however you want to summarize who's in making the decisions, they're trying to narrow the pathway down to freedom by having nations all kind of get on board with the SDR and the currencies in that basket for world money, as some commentators say. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's like a backup plan for, because central banks are losing power, so now let's get ready for the main central banks, World Bank and IMF. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's been in play for a long time, but it's not going to work because there's a new financial system that's emerging around the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They're setting up new banks outside of the IMF, outside of the World Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the New Silk Road Bank. They're making loans, billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of loans that are backed by yuan. They're backed by dollars in some cases because the Chinese have a lot of dollars. But they're backed most importantly by future production. And this is the new paradigm that's coming into existence. This is what my organization's been advocating for a long time. The reason the establishment is confronting Russia and China so aggressively is because they're trying to get Russia and China to back down from this new financial system. We saw the president of Brazil get impeached on the most flimsy grounds. They're trying to throw President Zuma out in South Africa. But there's a real fight between these two systems. And the interesting thing is the BRICS system is much more along the lines of the old Hamiltonian, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt American system. It's not a communist or state socialist system. It's based on what you and I have just been discussing. So I don't think the Chinese are going to get roped into having the yuan underwrite a global bankers' dictatorship, because their interest is in uplifting their people out of poverty. And they're now going into Africa and South Asia and South America with major infrastructure projects, high-speed rail, nuclear power, and so on. So I think we're seeing a shift to a new system. That's why the best thing that a new administration could do would be hold out our hand to the Russians and Chinese and say, we want to work with you. Let's make this what Xi Jinping calls a win-win situation. That's why it was so good to see the Trans-Pacific Partnership get buried in this conference of the APEC in Lima this week. And the Chinese and the Russians proposed a new Asian development project. And the U.S. media said this would exclude the U.S. And Xi Jinping said, no, not at all. We don't want to exclude the U.S. We want the U.S. in this. So we have a potential, but it wouldn't be a monetary system. It would be a credit system for physical production. And that would mean you wouldn't have a global bankers dictatorship. And a lot of people who, I know you see this on all the blogs and internet, talk about global bankers. They're so powerful. They have everything under control. They control the BRICS. The BRICS is a Rothschild operation. Nonsense. This is what's giving the bankers sleepless nights, the fact that there might be a new global monetary system that they don't control.
All right.
So I think people should study this. You can go to our website, LaRouchePack.com. We've put out numerous pamphlets and reports on the new financial system, Hamiltonian economics, and so on. And this is the way we could go if we wish to secure our future.
Right. Now, no, the subject matter we're talking about now, in my opinion, all has to do with the concept that China, Russia, all those BRIC nations that we're talking about, they began or have begun a long time ago rethinking the dollar. And so beyond the push for de-dollarization from the monetary system, as you mentioned, a new monetary system developing, let's talk about the dollar as we bring this to a conclusion. There's been a massive amount of U.S. Treasuries selling off at, I guess, unbelievable rates. How does that play into the whole idea that the dollar appears to be strengthening as well? And let's talk about the dollar in the days ahead as countries begin to rethink and turn away from the dollar. How will all this play out, this new monetary system minus dollars?
Well, if the U.S. accepts the offer of China to become part of this Eurasian perspective, the dollar will stay in play. The dollar will still be an important currency, at least for the short term, but not as a determinant of economics, but as a facilitator of trade. You see, that's the big difference with under the Bretton Woods system. Before 1971, where you had a fixed exchange rate, currency was not available for speculation, and therefore you tried to get a hold of the dollar if you wanted to buy things from the United States. So if we gear up our industrial and manufacturing capability in the United States, there's no problem with the dollar. If the dollar is just a funny money note that's part of the financial instruments that are traded, then the dollar ultimately is going to be worthless and it'll be left behind. What the Chinese are doing is they're using the dollars they're holding as the basis of generating new credit for physical production. And that's what we could do. I mean, the Federal Reserve is sitting on all these treasury notes right now. They could extend new credit against that to build high-speed rail systems connecting Detroit and Washington, for example. So there's a lot that we could do, but rethinking the dollar, in my sense of the term, is rethinking monetarism. If the dollar is a means of exchange for the increasing of productive value in the society, then fine, there's no problem. That would require some rethinking.
Yeah.
But if we're trying to figure out how can we keep the dollar strong as a competition against other countries, you end up falling into the old geopolitics, and that's not going to work anymore.
Yeah.
The world is moving away from them.
Right. Now, as we draw to the end, my last question, I promise. Gold, silver, precious metals, sound money, the policies that has been around for thousands of years, how will and how does that play into what's occurring with all these new financial institutions, and the accumulation of massive amounts of gold, from out east? How does all that play in this new monetary system, if at all? And, how does that impact the dollar and here locally as a citizens here in the United States?
Well, in the short term, countries like Russia and China are buying gold, but they're not going to go to a gold system. That's just a hedge to protect them. The problem with the gold system is that was originally set up as a British imperial control mechanism. That way they could control the circulation of currency by connecting it directly to gold. At this point, the idea of a gold specie system is an absurd one, because it would restrict credit so much. But a gold reserve system might be a necessary transition. But ultimately, what determines the value of money? It's not whether you have gold in your pocket, it's whether your economy can function and your government takes care of its responsibilities or not. When the U.S. has been strong, it's been when we've been an industrial manufacturing economy with advanced agriculture and infrastructure. And people took the dollar then not because they wanted to trade it in for gold, but because the dollar had the strength of the U.S. economy behind it. Now we don't have that anymore.
Right.
So what do we have? We have the fact that no money is any good, that all the world currencies are fiat money. So the simple solution is let's junk all the currencies and go to gold, but that doesn't work because we've got 7.2 billion people on the planet who need to eat and need a future. And you've got to figure out a way to extend the benefits of physical economy to the whole population. So that's what LaRouche's concern has been since the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971, which is, by the way, when I met Mr. LaRouche and first got recruited to this.
Well, Harley Schlanger, I appreciate you sitting down with us. Give the audience a chance, I guess, stay in tune with what you may have going on, any way they can, find and follow you or anything like that.
Well, the best place to go is LaRouchePac.com. It's LaRouchePac.com. And if people want to contact me directly, I'll give an email address for me. It's harleysch@gmail.com. I'll respond to all inquiries. It may take me a little bit of time to get to it, but I'm more than happy to communicate with your listeners.
All right. Well, Harley, thanks for sitting down with us. Enjoy yourself and have a great, happy New Year and Merry Christmas and everything included.
All right, Michael, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Rethinking a Dollar with today's guest, Harley Schlanger from LaRouchePack.com. Hope you found our conversation to be informative as well as educational. And as always, if you found it to be informative, please share it with your family and friends to help them become more monetarily aware on events happening around them, especially issues dealing with the dollar. As always, looking forward to bringing you more interviews. Click the subscribe button below for more RTD interviews and news updates. Until next time.